entitled to benefits. Once word gets out that this, and I am going to the radio station this morning to do a radio ad, I expect that we're going to be very, very busy in our office because there are a lot of Navy veterans out there that have a lot of these diseases that in the past have just been turned away. We had Todd Kabinski from the state of Minnesota in our office yesterday to give us some training. Recently, the VA has completely changed almost every form. So it's almost like I'm starting all over again. And we have to learn how to use these new forms and how to do them correctly. So it's nice to have that ability to have him come out to train. So hopefully we'll keep that ongoing. Recently, we received the 2018 statistic information for the amounts of the veterans in Kandiwai County of the benefits they've received. For 2018, the amount was $10,561,960. That's a hard number for me to say. That's how much money was brought into Kandiwai County to the veterans of Kandiwai County last year. And the percentage of veterans that are receiving benefits in Kandiwai County is 42%. I would always like to see that number higher, but ultimately not every veteran qualifies for veterans benefits. And the last thing that I'd like to bring up is since I won't see you again before this, once again, we are having Veterans Day at the county fair on August 7th. Every year it gets bigger and bigger. So we offer a free meal and a presentation honoring the veterans, not only of Kandiwai County, but surrounding areas. Anything else you have for me?
Do you have other years you've had a veterans at the Stingers game? Are you going to be doing that?
Oh, yes, that is the 22nd of June. Okay. Yes, it's unfortunately, they don't have any home games around the 4th of July, so this was kind of the closest to, and we like to have it on a Saturday so we can have fireworks after the game.
Mr. Chairman, Trish, you want to, I passed out some information at our board meeting the other day about the Flags of Honor. There's a fundraising effort going on there. I dropped it in your Dropbox for all the commissioners to take a look at. You want to talk any further about that? Or
sure. Yep. The Veterans Coalition group, joint group, is working on revamping out at the Flags of Honor. It's a very expensive project. They can get it started hopefully this fall is their goal. They need to raise $80,000 before they can even start working on it. The actual total cost of the revamp is $300,000, they're guessing. So right now they're in the initial fundraising initiative, and you can purchase paver rocks for $250, which we've had a lot of people coming in asking for their parents' discharge or someone in their family's discharge because you put their name, rank, the unit they served with, and the branch on the paver blocks, and those are $250. Then on those brochures that were passed out, there's higher, you can purchase a bench for $5,000, I believe. They're going to have a sponsor wall, so let's say if Jenny wanted to contribute a donation, then they would be on the wall of the sponsors of the memorial out there. So if you have a veteran in your family and want to recognize them, it's a great way to do it. Brian Giselson is the contact, but I have all the information in my office as well.
All right.
Anything else on that?
No,
okay.
Thank you. You summed it up very briefly, very quickly. That's good. Thanks.
Further questions for Trish? If not, Trish, if you need to come back and should come back and will come back before August 7th, don't have to say we won't see you again at that point till August. So certainly you are encouraged and welcome back at any point, and I know you know that as far as information. If there's special events that come up, certainly coordinate with Jenny as far as the scheduling, but certainly best wishes on the lots of events now in the next 2 or 3 months here with everything. And again, if any information that it is prudent and certainly timely, please come back.
And I should
You
touch
don't,
on,
you don't have to wait so long, Trish.
we did have a joint all-staff meeting not too long ago that you probably all are aware of, and I thoroughly enjoyed that, getting to learn what everyone else in the county does, and we were able to share information as well as get to know people face to face. I walk out in the parking lot now and I have people saying hi to me that I didn't know before, so that worked out great.
They
So,
all recognize your voice.
well, thanks for having me, and
Thank you,
let me know
Trish.
if you have
Have a
any
good
questions
day.
or concerns.
Thank you now. Now we will proceed and we welcome back Jay. First of all, we cut you short last time and actually you couldn't even get up here last time. We cut you off, but then Carl and Lilbon certainly looking at more of the domestic violence. So Jay, the floor is yours, and if you would proceed, please, welcome you.
Well, thank you. My name is Jay Vogley, and I'm here to talk to you guys today about sex offender supervision at the probation office. First of all, just a brief overview of the cases that I supervise or we supervise here. Criminal sexual conduct, it's broken down into first, second, third, fourth, and fifth degree. There's a bunch of factors that the county attorney's office and law enforcement look at when they're charging and what to charge or what the offenses is. They look at penetration versus contact, the age of the victim, maybe the difference in age between the victim and the offender, if force or coercion were involved, or if there's a vulnerable adult, there's other things. Those go into play on, say, charging a fourth degree versus a second degree, just with the difference. I mean, the penetration and contact or contact restrictions.
Mr. Chair? Before you go further, Jay, what's more severe, first or fifth?
The first degree would carries the highest sentence, and are looked at more severe than a fifth. First degree involves penetration, maybe with a young victim.
I didn't know if it
Yep.
was
And the
ascending
fifth
or
degree-
descending.
Fifth degree is a gross misdemeanor. They're all gross misdemeanor normally but in this case, the first degree is the most severe.
Thank you.
Good question, because later you're going to see a different where there's a first, second, third that's reversed. So it's good. Thank you. Also, late in the last 10 years, internet sex crimes have increased the caseloads quite a bit. They go from dissemination of pornographic material or sexual images to soliciting. Initially when we talked about the internet, we thought about it as just as the way that people meet and groom victims, but now there's or solicit new victims, but now it's that's actually become part of the crimes and sending out pornographic work and different things. For sentences, there's been increased sentences for sex offenses. First degree calls for 144-month commit to prison. Some second degrees, that's not totally, there's other second degrees that don't call for commit, but second degree is 90-month commit. And also what's one thing that's different for sex offenders is a conditional release period. I know Kurt was here last time and talked about the difference between parole and supervised release. And so he talked about there's a truth in sentencing. So people that get sent into prison for maybe 30 months have to do 20 months in prison, 10 months on supervised release. So for sex offenders, same thing, the truth in sentencing. So if somebody goes for 30 months, they do 20 in prison minimum, 10 months on supervised release, but they also get this what's called conditional release period. So if a sex offender goes to prison for 30, they do the 10 months once they get out, and then there's 10 years after that. So the supervision is the same for a lot longer period of time. They don't just do the 10 months on supervised release. In some instances, it's even lifetime. So for some of those first degree offenses, it may call for lifetime conditional release. So they'll be on supervision until they pass away. Also, for the majority of the people do not go to prison that I have on supervision. And then there's longer probationary terms for those people that don't go to prison. They get supervised similar, whether they went to prison or not, they have to, most all of them are required to do a psychosexual eval and register as a predatory offender. Psychosexual evals oftentimes require people to, our recommendation is that they complete sex offender treatment. With sex offender treatment, there's weekly group treatment. There's also educational programs, but a lot of them are required to do sex offender treatment treatments provided in this community by core professional services. Actually, there's a group going on today. There's 4 different groups of approximately 10 people in each group. They are not just Candioi County offenders. CORE does treatment in Sartell, here, and the next closest one to the south is in Marshall. So people from Candioi County to all the way to the South Dakota border and maybe down to Redwood. Redwood, they kind of maybe go, some of them go to Lyon County or to Marshall to treatment, but that group of, those groups of 10 people are not all Candioi County residents, but they are here every week doing sex offender treatment. Usually that treatment's, the minimum's about 18 months, but it could go well beyond that. Some people are, it's not like CD treatment where you go to treatment for 28 days or a certain amount of time. It's more treating the offender. And some of what treating the offender is they're required to do, oftentimes required to do polygraph testing. So you're really treating the whole person, not just that specific offense. Polygraph testing, there's 3 different types of polygraphs that are used. Full disclosure or sexual history polygraphs. That thing kind of talks about the offender's whole behavior, not just the specific offense. They're trying to treat them as a whole, not just, okay, they did some criminal sexual conduct in a 3rd-degree offense. And then there's merit maintenance polygraphs, which are usually done to verify compliance with treatment conditions and or probation conditions. And normally the normal process in treatment, sex offender treatment, is probably within the first 3 months of them being in treatment or 6 months. They do that full disclosure polygraph to find out what the client is involved in completely. And then before they maybe go to aftercare or before they're discharged, they would do a maintenance polygraph to verify compliance. And once in a while, there's specific issued polygraphs done. And those are specifically regard if somebody is denying some specific behavior about their offense. Those aren't done as frequently. Another thing that goes along with the psychosexual eval and treatment are contact restrictions. So people might be restricted. Oftentimes, like when Carl and Lilbin's cases, they talked about domestic cases, and they're restricted from having contact with the victim. In this case, with sex offenders, oftentimes they're restricted from having contact with maybe minors, maybe just minor females, maybe vulnerable adults, or restricted from having contact with social media in different areas like that. And sometimes those can be questions that are asked later on polygraphs to verify compliance with those conditions. Another portion that's a little different than other cases is predatory offender registration. Now, registration in other states, a lot of times, and it used to be called sex offender registration, but it started in Minnesota in 1991 for adults. They added juveniles in 1994. There's approximately 18,000 registered offenders living in Minnesota right now. So that seems like a lot. Approximately 110 are in Candioi County. I have maybe about half of those on supervision, maybe not quite half. The other, say 60 or 70 of them probably 60 or so are not on supervision any longer, but they're still required to register. Registration periods initially are for 10 years or their life, depending on the offense. But a lot of times they are, that 10-year period that most of them start out with, if there's different ways that they can get that time's restarted over. So if they have a new conviction, any new conviction with incarceration, so somebody is on for a crim sex and they get a DWI and they have to sit in jail for 1 day, the day they get out of jail, that 10-year registration period starts over. So they really have to be law-abiding for 10 years before they can get off of registration. The registration talks is private in Minnesota. Other states it's maybe public, but registration is private. It's for law enforcement purposes. It require and there's some differences in other states. Some states they maybe have to change stuff every year. In Minnesota, anytime they change the list there, anytime they change the address, their phone, their job, school that they may be involved with, vehicles, or secondary addresses. Anytime those change, they have to fill out a registration form. And if they're on supervision with me, I do it somewhat online, and then they sign something, we send it in. Otherwise, if they're off supervision, they go to law enforcement, and law enforcement does that part of it. There are people that are registered here that didn't commit their crime here, but they were registered in a different state. And there's different ways when they move from state to state that if they're required to register in a different state, they're still required to register here. Failure to comply with registration, or that POR, referred to as predatory offender registration, is a felony, and it calls for a commit to prison on the initial charge. One important thing to note with predatory offender registration is it does not differentiate between that first degree charge, or those people that you read about in the paper, or the third degree or fourth degree charge that are maybe somebody that was what we call a statutory offender, where they were 18 years old and had intercourse with a 15-year-old, and it's somewhat looked at as a less severe offense. Registration, they have to complete the same thing, so it doesn't differentiate between the two. Another piece that I'd like to talk to you about today is Community Notification Act. As of January of 1997, all registered offenders, when they're released from prison, are required to are subject to the Community Notification Act. What that is called the ECRC Committee, or the End of Confinement Review Committee. They don't actually go in front of a committee, but a committee, there's a bunch of people listed there: warden, law enforcement, treatment professional, victim service professional, and a caseworker. They review those cases and they assign them a level. So this is where, Roger, the level is different from the degree, and a lot of people get it maybe mixed up. But in this case, level 1 is the least risk, where the degrees, it's the highest risk. So again, you can see that level 1 and 2 are the majority of the people we have that get released are level 1s. And then there's some level 2s, but they're not public. And then what this qualifies, or the Community Notification Act, is it outlines who is to be notified when somebody is being released from prison. So on level 1s, the victim's notified, witness, law enforcement. Level 2, there's all the people in level 1 are notified, as well as the schools and daycares in that area. And then level 3s are the ones we hear about in the paper, or there's meetings, and they are public, so they require public notification. Sometimes they're meetings, sometimes it's Facebook or social media that the sheriff department has to deal with. Roger,
So,
you have a question?
a minute ago, you said registration is private, but now we're talking about a community notification, and is that, once they get out of prison, is that the distinguishing factor, or how can you sort those out?
Well,
Or how do we?
when they do a level, like the level 3s are the public pieces, and when they have a level 3 notification meeting, the meeting is public. They don't specifically put the person's address. They put a range. I mean, it's not. I don't know how to answer, but there's some pieces that are public to this, where people can notify or are informed, but the registration piece of what they drive, where they work, and other things are still private.
Also, if, when you look at it, like you commented a little bit earlier, there's 18,000 in the state of Minnesota approximately that have to register. Registration is a very different process than community notification. The majority of those 18,000 registered offenders they don't have a level. Very few sex offenders have an actual level assigned to them, because they have to go to prison to get a level. So a lot of the offenders in our community are registered sex offenders, but they don't have a level as assigned by the End of Confinement Review Committee. So it's a little bit confusing for people when you talk about sex offenders. Well, what level are they? The majority of them are not given a level.
That helps, thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
So these level 3s, there's like 1,200 level 3s in Minnesota right now, but only 300 of them are in the community. So there's a lot of them that are in prison or maybe at Moose Lake. There are, for the last month when I was going to come in, there was 2 living in Candioi County, and they are both off of supervision, but still living in the community.
One of the things they do at the end of this end of confinement review committee is also they screen them for civil commitment. So you may have heard the last time there was a community notification, that person went straight to a civil commitment proceeding and didn't actually come to the community.
And that's a whole different process where somebody is actually, before they get released, they get screened before they get released from prison, that is, and they get screened and they go through a process for civil commitment.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. Statistically, I'm sure you analyze this, you've been in it for many years. 91 it started, so now we have all the data accumulated for many years. We can see the increase through the decrease and the effects of our culture and what's changing based on the amount of arrests and enforcement that you people are doing, thank goodness. Is there anything alarming statewide, or what are the state or national statistics on the amount of people and the severity of the crime? Have you been monitoring that, or how healthy are we? Unhealthy, normal, or abnormal? I'm just curious what your data shows as far as the health of the state of Minnesota compared to other states based on population. The statistical data that can kind of narrow in on what's going on, if it's society or if it's just the area we live in or the metropolitan areas where it's severe. Do you have any data on that?
Well, I don't have any specific data on relating to other states. Obviously, the supervision we provide is for Candioi County.
Right.
But there's, it's always changing a little bit. I mean, registration period is, when you talk about predatory offender registration, it doesn't differentiate between offenders. But in the last, it's been long since 1991, but there's been different changes at different times. And, it seems like the big high-profile cases are the ones that change. I mean, it didn't used to be, you saw secondary address on there. That didn't used to be on there. You used to have a primary address until, the incident that happened in Moose Lake. I can't think of her, Donald Blum case, I think it is. And he was up there, but it was his secondary. It was a hunting cabin or something. So now, after that offense came out, then okay, they add different things to registering, where you have to register any place other property that you own, use, or rent. So if they have a storage shed or a cabin, they have to register that as a secondary address. So it's places they frequent. After another case, it kicked in where they went and everybody that's on registration have law enforcement or probation, in a combination of the two, are verifying that people are actually living where they're living every quarter. And sometimes those offenses are the ones you read about in the paper, but they trickle down into the people that maybe the statutory offense.
Tammy, you had a comment?
Yeah, so to try and answer, it's very difficult on the research side of things to compare state to state or over time, because our enforcement has gotten a lot better over the time, so we don't necessarily know what was happening in the 90s compared to what's happening today. I can tell you the research is showing that we're getting better at supervision, and we're getting better at sex offender treatment. The recidivism rates have been dropping when we use evidence-based practices in our treatment. As Jay talked about, there isn't a lot of research out there in terms of how community notification acts or how the registration can impact recidivism because you're trying to study a negative. You know, it's how much of a difference does this make? We do know it makes it very difficult for offenders because when we talk about what's happening here is we're notifying the public and saying this person is working, living in your community. We're sometimes putting their picture up, and it makes it very difficult for them to get a job, to find a place to live. There's areas where they're restricted from living in entire cities because of registration laws. And part of the thing we need to remember is these offenders are in our communities. Where they're not, there's lots of them. We can't lock them all up. They're here, and how do we supervise them the best way possible and provide the treatment? And when we put their names out and have people harassing them and doing things and make it impossible for them to get a job, it adds to the problem because it increases their risk level. The other thing that you asked what has changed, the biggest change we're seeing is the dissemination issues in terms of dealing with technology. Kids and adults not understanding how easy it is to put out video or pictures of people and using it against them. And it's one of those things that people aren't quite understanding so how do you supervise that? And how do you help these kids understand that process a little better?
And that once it's out there, it's out there forever. I mean, some of those online things.
So in your
The one-
opinion, do you think we have, I know since the 90s and this whole addiction thing, sexual addiction or whatever, and exploitation of people and it has gotten to be everybody's aware of it, much more than we have. So we've done the job statewide and nationally, I think, to bring people awareness of what's going on and how to report it. And we've done that with the education with their kids. I guess, and in that time also we've seen tougher laws on enforcement, and the predators are incarcerated, and we've done better on that. So that was kind of leading to my question that I asked earlier was, what statistics, how are we doing health care? Is this something we're falling short on, or is this something we're ahead of the game, or is it just an ongoing issue that we have to deal with as a percentage of so many people? We're going to be dealing with a mental health issue of this many people with sexual addictions. I guess I'm just curious how you analyze the benefits of your work when, how do you solve the problem? And I guess it's deep, but just in your personal opinion, I guess I was wondering what you might want to say as far as the state of Minnesota. Do we have adequate laws, and are we ahead of the game to protect our children and the vulnerable people?
And I think, the underlying issue in a lot of sex crimes is the secrecy of it. And I think a lot of these laws help with that. I know it maybe brings it to the forefront, so we hear about it more, but it also, is going to be healthier in the long run. I know once when we had the first couple of community notification meetings here after obviously after 1997, and they're like, why are these people getting out? And why should he get out? And, some of that was the kind of the common theme, when really they've been getting out forever. Now, at least the high-risk ones, we can help know about it a little bit and help them and help ourselves. To move on a little bit there's some myths. I was just going to wrap up with some myths about sex offenders. All sex offenders are males. There are females on probation. I think there's 4 right now. 3 of them are involved in group that have committed sex crimes. So they're not all females, or not all males, I should say. Majority, but not all. All sex offenders reoffend. Like Tammy said, data does not suggest that. And most sex offenses are committed by a stranger. I know that was the thing growing up, and it has been for a long time, stranger danger. But 90% of the offenses are committed by people that knew the victim. Now, those stranger danger offenses are the ones, just the recent one in the last 6 months or so in Wisconsin. Those are the ones that get the headlines in the news and sometimes control the laws, but the majority of the offenses are not committed by strangers. They're people that knew the victim. Any other questions?
Questions for Jay? I guess one of my thoughts, Jay, is that when you look at, whether it's the sex crimes or if it's chemical dependency or mental health, we add the new dimension of, and you alluded to this many times, the social media. the electronic stuff. It's a dimension that was not there in 94, 91. What has the internet been, 17, 18 years now, something like that, whatever it is? We add a whole different dimension. And to suggest that we're going to address and correct it, it's just kind of the addiction of the time. You know, during the Roman times, there was addictions. During the ancient Chinese, there was addictions. There has been addiction since humankind has been on this planet, and it's just a matter of what you address at that point in time. So I think we're able to understand better today and address it better through the education, as you said, the awareness and the openness and the conversations, which brings the conversation out more in the public, but also doesn't provide, it doesn't solve it. And that's not the intent, of course.
Right. One thing that really helps me, and I know I didn't touch on that with sex offender treatment that I intended to, was unlike CD treatment and some of the other treatments that CORE does treatment here, I sit in on each one of those groups, at least the initial part of the group. So I see my offenders there every week, and you can get a flavor for how things are going or what their issues are. Some things they talk about there, their high risks. Obviously, they do assignment each week, but they talk about high risks or work on safety planning or different things for different events. So it's a good way for me to keep up on some of those things, like Mr. Madsen said, because it is changing. It's changed a lot since I started supervising sex offenders and with the internet. And sometimes I'm not the quickest at that, but keep learning.
Thank you, Jay, very much. Appreciate it. Carl and Lilbon, who's going to do you're going to tag team?
We have no other information to present. We're here because we ended kind of short.
Yes,
and we
you
didn't
were
offer-
abruptly cut off is what it amounted to be at that point.
We didn't offer a lot of time for questions, so we want to be able to make ourselves available to answer any questions that you may remember at all from a few weeks ago.
Well, I guess I would start because the question I asked right at the end is that with the domestic violence, how has the social media contributed to that, the preponderance of that, or the severity, or the difficult in tracking? What do you gentlemen see with the social media, and how has that changed maybe the awareness, the outcomes? What challenges do we still have with, the ongoing challenges, with all this? What are your observations with that? I'm looking at like the orders for protection and those types of things, and how has that changed?
I think that, my opinion, I don't have any proof or stats, but in my opinion, that social media has been an avenue for perpetrators to continually re-victimize the victim. So if you want to go on Facebook, an offender may sign on as some other name, use somebody else's account, and have a litany of information or pictures or any kind of degrading information about the victim. And that just continually spreads around. Like Jay said, once it's out there, and anybody can look at it because it might be an open page. Excuse me. So in my opinion, that whole social media thing is very detrimental to the victims. On the other side of things, we have Safe Avenues or any victim services programs that can use social media to spread information about domestic violence programming, orders for protection, how to access services as a victim. So it can go both ways.
As a follow-up to that, Carl, when it comes to the sentencing or the investigation process and the culmination with a conviction, how is that enforced on the social media? You just alluded to, using a pseudonym, using somebody else's. Is that part? How do you regulate that? How do you control that? Because you can put on Facebook anything you want, anytime you want. Fact, fiction, doesn't make a difference. Exactly. So is that part of the court proceedings, that there is some accountability for that, or is that just kind of out there?
They're in an order. They'll have, the court would order a domestic abuse no contact order, which would include no use of third-party contact, social media, not to use direct contact, or indirect contact is what we would call that. But again, what we've experienced with inmates at the local jail here, they will get on somebody else's account and make contact. And so they are just running around those rules that are set up by the court. County Attorney's Office makes every effort to build the structure to protect those victims, but we're playing catch up to all this new technology that Jay had alluded to.
Mr. Matson, I think my response is we're trying. And we're shooting an arrow at a target that's gigantic, big. And so, in conjunction with the county attorney's office, there are conditions. You stay off of social media. You don't contact the person. You don't call the person. You don't text the person. All of that exists. And it helps. It gives us teeth to supervise and gives law enforcement the tools they need to grab somebody if they're misbehaving. But, you know, we can just get people to use their brain power to do good things, as, you know, as much for good things as they do to try to circumvent orders like that. This probably would be a better world.
And one of the hard
Yes,
things I would say is that what Lobin and Carl are saying are true. They're really good tools. But ultimately, a lot of our information comes directly from the victim, whether it's a phone call, a text, because they can call from a different number just as easily as they can sign into a different Facebook account or change their name. And we investigate all of those. They take everything very seriously, and if we can tie it back to that person, and a lot of times, you just read the message, and it's talking about kids in common. It's talking about things that would be specific to that relationship. So you can use the context of the message as well to support a violation, not only the fact that it came from John Doe's Facebook account, not his name.
Last follow-up question. Is there training? Is there support? Is there mentorship for the victim to help them to navigate with the social media? I mean, I can imagine the barrage and the intimidation that would be overwhelming that would come to male or female, wouldn't make any difference. Is there a support network that provides that individual with support, encouragement, and training of how to then report and respond and deal with that?
Sorry, I'll jump in, sorry. I think it's a system-wide. It's been, we've had a lot of grants and a lot of training for all of our partners in the system, whether it's the attorneys in our office, the probation officers, the victim services coordinators, and we have a great relationship between our offices and law enforcement also having that tools, as well as Safe Avenues, and there's a lot of contact. So if they don't feel comfortable coming to us, we encourage them to come to probation. We encourage them to go to law enforcement. Safe Avenues is great because they have a lot of those tools and trainings, and we try to, I know our victim services people will call Safe Avenues for somebody if they don't want to make that initial phone call, bring them into our office. So I think it's really just educating all of the system partners to identify and help the victim.
Commissioner Emdick.
Sorry.
So just to make sure that I've got this in the proper context, Jay was talking about sex crimes, but when you were here, and it's a couple months now, we were talking about domestic abuse. So kind of a separation there, although they certainly crossed over. So I think I wrote a note down here, and I must be based on something you said, that the white male is the worst offender.
He's the
Most common offender?
common.
Okay, is that simply because there are more white males, or what is the reason why a white male might be the worst offender versus other cultures? And then as a follow-up, how successful is rehabilitation?
Maybe come up to the mic so the TV
Yeah.
can pick you up.
Yeah, then, we want your face on the screen.
There he is.
Mr. Emdyke, to the first question, I believe that the white male is the most common offender because that's the most prevalent race that.
So on a
that-
per capita basis, it's
Right.
probably,
And this is based on our experience, and I don't know if it would be different in Rochester or Minneapolis. We're reporting what we deal with here. Your second question,
about the success of rehabilitation.
I don't have statistics. I think I can honestly say that a lot of the times rehabilitation is successful, not every time. And the reason is because a lot of the times, a lot of people get into domestic situations where they fly off the handle and say something they wish they hadn't, or pushed or shoved or got into a shoving match. And we deal with those people, and thank God we have a lot of people who make mistakes when they commit a domestic. And then we have a critical mass of people that are determined to exert power and control against the victim. And that critical mass of people, recidivism is probably fairly high.
And apologize for dominating the questions here, but adverse childhood experiences, is there a strong relationship between that and later becoming an offender?
Absolutely. If you want to talk, stop me, but I'll just, yeah. When we deal with a typical domestic violence case, a lot of times children are involved. And we do everything we can to get our primary responsibility is rehabilitation of the offender. But the victim needs as much help as the offender does. And if there's children involved, just imagine children seeing the two people that they love and who are here to protect them fighting and arguing or hurting each other. That's part of the interview process. A lot of times you find out there's problems by ascertaining that, that they're beginning to act out, wet the bed, or get violent at school. Those little people need help too, and we try to do everything we can to put them in the hands of people that can help them.
So speaking about ACEs, we don't have an assessment tool that we use in office, but I believe if we would break down the clients overall, not just domestics or sex offenders, just general offenders, I believe that we would find many of them scoring a minimum of 2 to 3 to 4 criteria in the ACEs assessment. So yes, that is almost a direct relation, past experiences to what's going on now. We actually had a training today about social learning over in our office. Much like that, what we experience as youth, what we get from our parents, from our social, our peers, influences what we do as an adult, the decisions that we make. That correlates with that as well. I just want to go back to what we talked about earlier about the system-wide effort, the people that help out. That's where we take a lot of effort in our office to use thinking reports, any kind of MI skills, carry guides to really focus in on that domestic violence training that reduces that recidivism. Because it's not just about the batterers program, the 26-week program, it is about meeting with them and asking them questions. How is it going? What's going on in everything else in their life that we could address, maybe an ACE that happened 30 years ago. So we can refer to other mental health facilities that we have partnerships with. So there's more to it than just going to group.
What was the acronym, Carl, a little bit as far as the process that you use? I don't recall the assessment process.
Was it the ODERA?
Pardon?
ODERA?
No, that was, there's something that just triggers at that point when you were talking about the sequencing. I'll ask you later on when there's more time.
Okay.
Tammy?
So just kind of to follow up as an overview a little bit, when everybody, the probation officers, I brought them here to talk about specialized caseload specifically, but this kind of gives you a little bit of a taste of what they're doing when they're meeting with the offenders every day. In terms of, our first priority is the community safety, but it's also looking at rehabilitation so that we can reduce that recidivism. And when you ask the question about, do we see changes in these offenders? We actually do. The programs that the probation officers are using with domestic violence treatment programs, they're using these thinking reports, they understand social, going through social learning theory, identifying what skill deficits, where these offenders are having issues, and how do they help them move through that process. It is kind of interesting, like yesterday, I had an offender come complain about his probation officer because he didn't want to do this work. He thought he was fine, and he just didn't want to do it anymore. Why does she have to talk to me? I don't want to talk about these things. It's like she's a therapist. Well, that's kind of one of their jobs, is to really get into that, the ACEs and the different things that they're doing, so that they can help them be successful. And when we do have that process, our recidivism rates, we can show, are really reduced. If we don't use evidence-based practices and we just have them come in and say hi and send them on their way, then we don't see a lot of reduction in recidivism. So that's why it's important that the probation officers are trained and have these skills as they go forward.
Thank you, gentlemen, all of you. Appreciate it
Good
very
job.
much.
Thank you.
Tam, you have administrative updates? Anything from the legislature? There was lots of discussions with corrections, and how did that finish up?
We didn't get anywhere. It was kind of disappointing.
Surprise.
In A, B, C, D, or E, we didn't get any place at all in
No.
other things either.
At this
But
point.
did more of it get dumped on counties, or did that?
Yes, at this point, if we do not see an increase in county, in our, what we call our CCA subsidy, coming forward, we will see an increase to the counties because, so what happened with, but interestingly enough, the state didn't get their increases either at this point, so we can't complain too much. But the State Department of Corrections did request an increase in dollars from the legislature. They left CCA out at that point. So if that goes forward as it exists, we would not see an increase in our funding to deal with any of the increases we've seen over the last couple of years, and that would stand for 2 years. So that would be a little bit of a significant problem. Our AMC and CCA communities did put a bill forward requesting just a general cost of living increase to cover the corrections cost for the counties. It did not go anywhere. It's not going to make it through at this point. So as part of that process, we're going to spend some time this summer talking about single funding formula and what that means to our county, and essentially trying to even the playing field over the next couple of years. And we do have support from the Department of Corrections to look at this. And so there's two things. We're going to look at justice reinvestment. As they reduce the prison population, how do we put that money back into funding supervision in the communities? And also, how do we even the playing field with single funding formula by having each county, no matter what the delivery system is, use the same formula for funding? Because right now, whether you're a community corrections agency, a county probation agency, or a Department of Corrections agency, your funding is different. And really what single funding is saying, we need it to be across the board the same.
And that has been a strong angst with AMC for several years.
Yes, because
And it
as
continues to be.
the way it works right now, the counties have had to pick up the costs again and again. Community corrections was designed to encourage counties to go community corrections because of the idea that we know what our counties and our communities need better than the state does a lot of times. At this point, it's kind of gone the other direction, and so that's why we want to address it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we're adjourned.
Okay.
That was the county.
I don't know how to get this off. I might have,
You
Jenny?
don't want to change the form.